And good afternoon. Thanks for the invitation by Debbie and also Edward. I'm very pleased to share my research with you because for me, yesterday is a very special day because it was, 100 years ago, it was the opening of the British Empire exhibition. And then somehow in the last few days, there were many discussions about this. And then I also have some friends talking about how to debate on the British Empire exhibition nowadays for the context nowadays. And then I think this is a very useful guest lecture for me, also to reflect on my research, especially nowadays at this moment, in Leeds, so that I would also engage the discussion in the decolonisation in the UK and also the decolonisation discourse in Hong Kong. So I have 40 minutes, so I would be brief, but then I hope that I will include some essential information about the British Empire exhibition and also my research. So first of all, British Empire exhibition, some basic information, and then Hong Kong section, and then later on, finally, talking about decolonisation. So British Empire exhibition, it was organized in 1924 and 1925. It was originally, as you can see from the title, an empire exhibition. So it's an exhibition about the British Empire. When it was proposed in 1902, it was actually proposed by the British Empire League. As you can see from the title, it's not exactly something about the world. It's not exactly about something about Britain only. It's about the empire. The reason why people had this idea was, of course, British Empire was a very powerful one in 1902, and then it was, at the time, having that kind of international atmosphere that people in Europe and somehow in the US and also in Japan, they loved to exhibit their colonies. So it was proposed in 1902 as something like this. But then of course it's affected by the First World War. And then when it was really organized is in 1924. And then because it was in laws in 1924, then it was organized again in 1925. But as you can see, the international atmosphere changed a lot over time. And then when it was organized in 1920s, internationally, and of course also locally in the UK, people started to question a lot for the future of the empire, and then question a lot. Is it good to exhibit colonies in the UK? So this is the background. It was not proposed in 1920s. It was proposed at a time when colonization was still regarded as something appropriate at the time. But then when it was organized, there were many changes being brought to this place. It is Wembley, so the exhibition site is at Wembley. So nowadays, if you visit Wembley, basically everything had been demolished. But then nowadays, if you are going to attend, say, the FA Cup final, then the stadium, which you can see on the top left, not top left, but then on the left hand side, the stadium, the location is the same, but the stadium had been demolished. So basically, almost everything has gone, and this is Hong Kong section. As you can see from this postcard image, Hong Kong section is not located in the center. What's located in the center are those more so-called important dominions and colonies, say Canada, Australia, and also say India. So Hong Kong is not something valued at the time, and then this is Hong Kong section. As you can see, it's actually located next to the railway. So it's very noisy. So it's not somewhere that you must go somehow. So Hong Kong was not exactly marginal one, but in terms of location, it's not something that the organizers thought that is the center or something that you must see right at the center of the park. But still, Hong Kong successfully changed its image in Hong Kong through the pavilion. So for my research, basically, I talk about several things. So what was Hong Kong section? What's the organization? What's the colonial? And then organizing process, and then there were some controversies, and then how come Hong Kong did not experience too many controversies coming from the organization of it. And then finally, talking about the representation of Hong Kong in 1920s and then its political significance, especially its relevancy to Hong Kong and Britain nowadays. And it's basically based on archives, which I look at, say, those archives coming from National Archives or and the Government Records Office in Hong Kong. And then also there's some architectural research, which I will share some findings with you very soon. And then also based on some media, some journals and newspapers talking about the representation of Hong Kong, especially people in the British media, less about Chinese media in Hong Kong and Chinese mainland at the time. And then I also collected a lot of things. So it's also based on my collection. Okay, so first of all, what was Hong Kong in 1920s? I think in Hong Kong in the 1920s, for its image is somehow a mix. So on screen, something that you can see is a photo was taken from the peak towards the Victoria Harbour in 1920s. So somehow, as you can see, is similar to any colonial city or any European city, which you can find a lot of Western architecture and then some, of course, some modern infrastructure. But then on the right-hand side, what you can see is it's not a photo, it's an illustration coming from a French magazine. It's actually the same. I mean, the same angle, and then also looking at Victoria Harbour, and then of course also having some Western architecture. But then what you can see in front of the screen is a person with ponytail. At the time, Qing Dynasty, Qing Empire actually collapsed for more than a decade. But then still, it's an image of Hong Kong in places like France, seeing it as a kind of extension of the traditional Chinese culture. Okay, so this is a kind of image of Hong Kong in Europe. Somehow it makes a modern one. That the photo was actually in the US, so in Europe and also in the US. Anyway, somehow it makes between modern city and then a kind of city with modern Western culture, but also some traditional Chinese culture, especially being linked to feudal China, being linked to the Qing Empire. But then what's more important for my research is that when the first and the second season of the British Empire exhibition were organized, there were actually two strikes in Hong Kong. So the Seamen strikes and also the Canton Hong Kong strike. There are some impacts on it, which I would introduce very soon. So basically, I think in the 1920s, Hong Kong was affected by three kind of isms. So British imperialism, communism, and then also the Chinese nationalism. I'm unable to talk about everything because of time, but I would talk about mainly on imperialism and also the nationalism one. And then for Hong Kong Pavilion, similar to most early exhibitions in Europe, also in the US and also in Japan, there are two types of buildings that you can find. For those, say the one in Wembley Park. So basically two types of architectural features for different types of colonies or dominion. So for the colonies, say the Burma section and the walled city of Africa, they were built with the so-called local indigenous architectural features. But then for those dominions, they were actually built with the neoclassical. I know neoclassical architectural features somehow a very big term, but then anyway, to put it more simply, it's like a kind of traditional classical European architectural design. So there are actually, I mean, at the site, the organizers actually thought that, okay, we should build differently. So Hong Kong was somehow the same. Hong Kong was actually, I mean, same to other colonies. The exhibition building was built with traditional Chinese architectural feature. According to Robert Bickers, the historian at Bristol, he argued that at British Empire Exhibition, Hong Kong section was actually advertised not as a, British colony, but the reason why Hong Kong was important to Britain is that through Hong Kong, Chinese culture or Chinese Empire could be incorporated to the British Empire. So I think this argument is somehow, this observation is somehow accurate, because if you see the front, this is the exterior of the building, looking from the outside, from the not the inside, but the outside of the building. What you can see is a traditional Chinese architectural piece. So somehow similar to some other sections, like say West Africa or say Burma, that I've the Burma section that I've introduced just now. Of course, when we are looking at the details, not exactly, because if you look at the detail of this building, it's not exactly Hong Kong. It's like, what the buildings that you will see in Hong Kong, the architectural structure that you can see just now, the one on the right-hand side that I'm not showing you now, but I'm going to show you very soon. You could not find it. You could not find a lot in Hong Kong, but you could find from the northern China. So I think somehow Robert Baker's argument is accurate, because the purpose is not to showcase what exists in Hong Kong. So this one is a temple in Hong Kong. It's still, it's still here in Hong Kong. So somehow, as you can see, not exactly the same to the Hong Kong section. So my purpose is, one of the purposes of my research was to reconstruct the building, because I want to know what's going on, what this building is. Does it really reflect what Hong Kong was, or does it reflect, say, the Chinese traditional culture, not in Hong Kong, but in other places in China? So I look at different sources, and then something like this. So this is an illustration coming from a newspaper, a magazine. If you go to, say, some places, if you search internet, it's very easy for you to find it. But then I look at them, and then working with my research assistants to recreate the whole thing. So I hope to see, is it really the case that, say, according to the Illustrated London News, is it really the case that there is no fake about Hong Kong section at Wembley, and that every details was made in the colony and shipped to England? And then here in in the building, you can find something real Chinese street, and then among them the real Chinaman. I know this somehow discriminative to the standard nowadays, and then carrying their usual business in the usual way. So I think somehow yes, and then somehow no. So there are three elements of the Hong Kong pavilion. So the building itself is composed of two things. The first thing is the Chinese architectural structure, which you can see at the center of this image. So including a Chinese restaurant, a gate tower, and then several exhibition hall. So the gate tower and then the Chinese restaurant, it doesn't really look like what you can see in Hong Kong. So for instance, in Hong Kong, you can't find any gate tower in Hong Kong like this. Hong Kong did have something like this. We had a gate tower like this at Kowloon Water City, but then it's not something popular, and it's not for Hong Kong locals. It's actually for the Chinese officials coming from southern China. So somehow, yes, it's illustrating Hong Kong, what Hong Kong had, but then not exactly. It's somehow a kind of adaptations of different types of architectural pieces that you can find across different places in Chinese mainland, especially in northern China. So I think Robert Baker's argument is somehow accurate. But then what made me more interested is the Chinese street and then the shop houses, which you can find on the right-hand side. So I think this is something making Hong Kong section at the British Empire Exhibition distinctive. So what is the Chinese street? So the Chinese street is actually a kind of reconstruction, not exactly, of course, not to the scale, but then it's a kind of reconstruction of the Queen's Road Central in Hong Kong at the time. As you can see, the building itself, this is coming from the National Archives. At the time, most buildings along Queen's Road Central were at least 3 stories tall. For some buildings, it's taller than 7 stories. But then this is the postcard image as far as I can remember at the site. So it's only 2 story tall, and they're not exactly a kind of street with 2 on two sides with the buildings. On one side, which you can see on the right-hand side of this image, is a Chinese restaurant. So not exactly something that you can see in Hong Kong because it's not the scale. It's not exactly a narrow street with two buildings on both sides. But then somehow you can see some business at the site. So along the shop houses, there were some shops coming from Hong Kong, and then there are the Chinese. They were owned by the Chinese enterprises, not the British one. The British ones, they were exhibited in the exhibition hall. So somehow, yes, it's exhibiting Chinese culture, but then still you can find a lot of things that you could only find it distinctively in Hong Kong. So besides identifying the shops and then also the so-called exhibits, which are also the products for sale at the shop, I also again I worked with my research assistants to recreate it. So as you can see on the right-hand side, there are some rendered image, and then on the top left corner is actually the model that I built. Not actually me, of course, with my research assistant built this model. How come I think that this Chinese street is important? Because it made Hong Kong distinctive, and it made Hong Kong different from other Chinese pavilions, which you can find in Europe and also in the US in the old days. So this is the Chinese pavilion at the 1900 international exhibition. You could also find a Chinese restaurant. You could also find a Chinese architectural piece, but you could not find the Chinese street. You could not find a reconstruction of Queen's Road Central. And then in Europe at that moment, this is 1964 and 1965, the exhibition in New York. So still, it emphasizes the Chinese architectural connection rather than the Queen's Road Central that you can see. So I think the 1920s one at Wembley, they tried to present what Hong Kong really was. So more than some fantasy about the extension of Chinese culture. Okay, but then going back to Wembley, Hong Kong was not the only one, definitely, and it's not the most important colony to Britain, and then also to this exhibition is not the most important ones. For the organizers and also for organizers, there were actually some businessmen, but then this exhibition was endorsed by the government of Britain and also endorsed by the royal family. So somehow it represents the national view. But anyway, going back to the analysis, for the organizers, what's more important for them, of course, is Africa, is India, and also Caribbean. At the time, it's named as I think something like West Indies. Anyway, so at British Empire exhibition, there was something not nice. So they try to present colonies as something primitive, something lagging behind, and then trying to use its connection to something so-called tradition or something before colonization to illustrate that colonization is bringing something nice to the colonies. So this is one of the most important examples, which invited a lot of controversies in the 1920s, and especially nowadays, people reflected on it. So this is the latest street of Nigeria. So if you visit the exhibition site in the 1920s, if you go to the walled city of West Africa, you could see a reconstruction of the buildings. So that's fine. But then you could even see some people, the locals coming from Nigeria, they were exhibited as human beings. So what you can see are the everyday life of them. And then these people were exhibited as exhibit. So of course, nowadays we know that it's not ethical. But then at the time, of course, some people also thought that it's no good. But then at the time in Europe, it was somehow popular to when you visit exhibition, you will see something like this. So it's not nice. And then the purpose is to contrast colonization and something before colonization. So it's arguing that colonization is bringing something nice because it's somehow changing the primitive society in Africa. Of course, we know it's not exactly something correct. And then also for this is a short menu of Gold Coast. Short menu, it means a kind of brochure illustrating what Gold Coast was, and then of course talking about the history and also the at the time the modern development since British colonization, the British Gold Coast. It's actually written by an anthropologist, but then later on, people found that anthropologist actually misunderstood the local language, and that he misunderstood the culture at Gold Coast. So even at the time, even though we had some academic research, still is not representing the local culture correctly. We don't know if that anthropologist was intentional or not, but what we know is there were many inaccurate representations of colonies at the time. And then exactly because of British Empire exhibition, the West African Student Union, they started to organize themselves. Those students coming from West Africa, studying in London, they organized among themselves and then to, of course, fight against colonization, fight against imperialism. So British Empire exhibition, I don't have time, but it somehow consolidated the so-called imperial identity, but then it also ironically stimulated a lot of controversies, and even for some anti-colonial, anti-imperial movements is coming from this empire exhibition. As I've introduced earlier when I started this presentation, as I said, in 1920s, the atmosphere about colonization or imperialism changed a lot when it's compared to Latino roles. Okay, going to Hong Kong. So the question would be, of course, did we see something similar at the Hong Kong Pavilion? The answer is somehow yes or somehow no. When it was planned, yes, there was something that people didn't find it nice, and it was in the plan. So it's coming from an illustration before the exhibition. So in the original plan, Hong Kong Pavilion actually included rickshaw pullers and then also Chinese coolies. So the organizers coming from London, they thought that why not including Chinese laborer, Chinese coolies, or the rickshaw pullers at Wembley. So they thought that is good. But then the locals in Hong Kong, when they heard this news, okay, there will be some laborers and the rickshaw, especially rickshaw pullers, being sent to Wembley. The local workers, labor unions, they thought that it's not nice because it's a kind of discrimination. They thought that it's okay for them to work as Chinese laborer, but then it's not okay for them to be demonstrated in front of Europeans. They thought that it's something not nice. So they complained to the Chinese Chambers of Commerce, and then the Chinese Chambers of Commerce communicated with the General Chambers of Commerce, and then the Hong Kong government, which three of them organized this Hong Kong Pavilion. And then they decided not to send any Chinese laborers, and then especially rickshaws, to Wembley. But then it's only part of the story. According to a newspaper article by South China Morning Post, the idea of rickshaw pullers was dropped at Wembley is because Hong Kong Pavilion, they hope to make money by sending rickshaw pullers and rickshaw to Wembley. The Wembley organizer thought that no, you shouldn't make money on them because they have their own transport system within the Wembley Park, and they hope to make their own money. So they decided not to do it. So it's somehow more complicated to Hong Kong. It's all about money. Okay, I still have around 15 minutes, so I would be brief to talk about other representations of Hong Kong and then the decolonization discussion in the UK and also in Hong Kong. Okay, so going back to basic about the pavilions, Hong Kong Pavilion. At the very beginning, indeed, the governor of Hong Kong did not want to participate. So this is governor in Hong Kong in 1920s. In the early 1920s. So he thought that no, we shouldn't participate. It's basically because of money. So they thought that it would be loss making. So the Hong Kong government did not want to participate. And then in the 1920s, there were many wars, many strikes in Hong Kong, and then some small scale wars in China at the time, and then later on more large scale wars. And there are a lot of different types of disputes in Hong Kong. So the government in Hong Kong thought that it's something too much for them, and there is loss making, so they did not want to participate. And then using this excuse by saying that the goods being handled in Hong Kong were not produced in Hong Kong, so they could not be regarded as products of the British Empire. And then they are saying that if you exclude all those things being traded in Hong Kong but not produced in Hong Kong, then practically Hong Kong has nothing to be showcased at Wembley. Of course, we know there is a kind of excuse, and then there were some local productions in Hong Kong, and then Hong Kong, there were some not exactly natural resources, but there's some local culture that you can showcase in London. But then the organizer also know that it's a kind of excuse, so they know this. They are saying that okay, even for those not produced in Hong Kong, but for those products being prepared or packed in Hong Kong, you can showcase at London. So at the end, there are some different types of products being showcased in London. So there are some typical ones, say the Rush ware, China ware, something that Hong Kong was famous for at the time, and then say silk or cigarettes. So this is some famous one. But then it also includes lychees. I still don't know how to transport it from Hong Kong to London at the time. I mean, it's very costly for you to keep it fresh, but then it's something pretty typical indeed. But then from the Hong Kong government point of view, it's more than the Chinese products. They also included something local. So this is there's a very famous thing by to describe Hong Kong as a barren rock. So the Hong Kong government also want to change this kind of image, because as I presented, so it's natural for those people in Europe and to showcase colony is a kind of lagging behind, and then colonization is something nice to bring about modernization. So the government of Hong Kong, they also intentionally changed this image. So by saying that after 80 years of colonization, Hong Kong was no longer a barren rock. But then I think for the locals, I mean, local here means the local European communities, especially the British. I think it's less about colonization. It's more about the attachment to the metropole. So the local British, they also hope to illustrate that Hong Kong is actually something really great. And then they achieved something in Hong Kong. So please trade with me. So I think from their point of view, it's more about business. And then this is one of the examples. It's coming from the SWA Hong Kong archives. The photo is coming from the SWA archives. So at Wembley, they exhibited the model of the dockyard by Taikoo, so by Swire. So I think it's a kind of illustration that Hong Kong had become the second largest shipbuilding city within the British Empire, except within Britain. So I think for the local British communities, what they saw is less about colonization. What they saw is more about business and then the attachment with the metropole. But then, of course, nowadays, especially in the UK, a lot of discussion about decolonization. I think we can also look at it from a decolonial lens. And I think Hong Kong is a kind of response to what's inadequate when we are having discussion about decolonization in the UK and somehow in the US. So the definition of decolonization is somehow fluid. And then here comes one of the most famous book about decolonization. I don't read out everything, and then it's very complicated. And then, of course, it's not exactly the purpose for today. But I think in general, coloniality is talking about the mindset, the way that we thought, the way that we talk, and also the way that we understand things. Coloniality means even after colonization, we are thinking from this angle. So, and to make it decolonial, it means we need to think differently and then we need to think, say, locally, to think from another angle. Say, if you're coming from, say, here, I excluded it. Anyway, coming from, say, the former colonies in South America, you should think locally rather than thinking from something similar to what the colonizers did in the old days. But I think this kind of understanding of decolonization actually is actually not that useful when we are talking about Asia, basically because of that several reasons. First of all, the context of those books were not about Asia. So the books themselves, they did not talk locally. And then they asked people to talk locally. So I think first of all, it's somehow contradictory. So it's not something local. And second of all, the experience itself for the colonization experience in East Asia, especially, is very different from other places. Especially in Asia, there was another colonizer called Japan. And then not to mention that there are also other imperial power in the old days. So I think by using the decolonial discussion coming from, say, Europe or the US, it doesn't really work well when we are talking about Asia. And then it's not exactly my experience only. And then the Thai's cultural studies scholar Chen Guanxin also talked about it more than 10 years ago by saying that what he heard about the post-colonial discussion in Britain does not really fit when we are talking about experience in East Asia. And then there were actually many books, not many, but there are some books talking about post-colonialism or post-colonialism in Hong Kong, and then a more so-called traditional one, published some time ago by Richard, talking about Hong Kong's in-betweenness, which is more accurate to describe the colonies of Hong Kong, the colonial experience of Hong Kong, and then say Long San, you also talk about Hong Kong's colonial experience is more about how the locals and then also the colonizers, they collaborated to develop capitalism in Hong Kong. So because of time, so I don't dwell on it, and then I would finish my presentation with this, not this slide, but then with this discussion, what really happened at the site, and then how did the Chinese communism and the Chinese nationalism affected the mindset of the people at the time. So more than imperialism, when we are talking about how the local Chinese responded to criticisms, and then how they responded to the representation of Hong Kong at Wembley Park. As a kind of background, in 1924 and 1925, there were two wars. Not two wars. There were two major events in China. First of all, there were many wars in northern China between the warlords. So it's very violent, and then it's changing people's mind. And then people started to think about Chinese nationalism, and then people started to think about communism. But then Chinese communism also began to arrive Hong Kong. So the local businessmen, especially the Chinese ones, they were very frightened to hear that communism was coming to Hong Kong. And then there was also strike. So people started to notice that, okay, there was some political influence coming from northern China to Hong Kong. And then, as I've mentioned, this is a committee organizing it. So I've basically mentioned what the local British community thought and the local government thought. But then what's the most important ones, I think, is the local Chinese, especially the local Chinese elites, say Chow Shouzhen and then Robert Ho Tong. How did they manage it? Because what they heard at the time is they had a lot of pressures coming from other Chinese. I know Ho Tong is a Eurasian. Anyway, other Chinese coming from southern China by saying that, okay, so you guys, you are Chinese. How come you're living in Hong Kong? How come you don't donate a lot of monies to support the revolutions in China? So they face a lot of criticism, and they face a lot of pressures coming from their collaborators in southern China. But then they visited the colonizer. They visited Britain to illustrate, to showcase Hong Kong. So they did. They faced a lot of criticisms and then pressures. And what they did is somehow, for me, it's useful for the organizers because they won't complain on something like this. This is the poster of the organizer. As you can see, is trying to portray Hong Kong and then trying to portray traditional China, something that you could not see at the time, because people started to change. I mean, their image at the time. Their style at the time. So you could not see a lot of ponytail. I mean, people with ponytail in Hong Kong or Chinese other parts in China. But then, first of all, I doubt if those say Ho Tong or Chao Shousen actually saw this image. Even if they saw it, I think that they might not complain, because ironically, these images or something like this is a painting illustrating Hong Kong before colonization. So from, say, the African view or the Indian's view, they would be thinking that these things are to showcase something lagging behind and to contrast modernization that colonialism brought about. But then for those Chinese elites, for them, it's actually a kind of connection with Chinese culture and history. At Wembley, they were trying to show Chinese culture, okay, and then these are something traditional. They find it okay. They didn't find it offensive, because these things are a kind of not stereotypical images for them. These things are the showcase of the connections with Chinese culture. So even though they're living in Hong Kong, even though they are rich, they still have nationalism. If not this term, they still have the Chinese identity in their mind. So ironically, something like that, they did not find it offensive. For them, the most important is, of course, business. Say this one by Wholesome on Oil. So they received a kind of prize coming from the UK, and then they could make it like an advertisement to showcase that even in the UK, you use my Chinese medicine. And then, as I said, the demonstration of everyday life is actually banned. It's actually avoided for the case in Hong Kong. But then what they did is to demonstrate the process of industrial production. So, and then also music performance. So at the end of the day, they actually find it okay. So it's a kind of illustration that even for the local Chinese, even if beyond the richest ones, they could also manage to showcase their works at Wembley. Okay, because of time, so I will skip this, and then I would go to this one and then to end my presentation. I'm looking at something else. So after finishing the Hong Kong one, I'm working on the Malaya one, and then it's coming from a Singaporean magazine. At the time, is part of the Australian settlement. So what they saw again, as you can see, if you can read Chinese, again, what they thought is actually about business. So less about the connection with colonization. But of course, at the time, most newspapers were owned by the rich Chinese persons. So I doubt if it really reflects the minds of the locals. But I think if we understand colonization in Hong Kong and then somehow in Singapore, I know that at the time it's part of the Australian settlement. But I think if we try to understand colonization in East Asia more accurate, I think we need to read locally, and then we need to understand what local really thought about when they were talking about the British Empire exhibition. So towards the end, I hope to showcase some works for you. Okay, so this is the exhibition that I had in Hong Kong, and then this is the model that I built, and then this is the one that I organized at Hong Kong U Library. And if you're interested, you can buy this book. It's published by me, and then there are a lot of things that I've included in the book, and I don't have time to share it here. But anyway, okay, there are some references if you're interested. And then thanks so much for your time. And then I will finish my presentation here. I think I'm on time. Thanks.